John had always considered himself a quiet person. He preferred solitude over crowds, a good book over loud music, and a peaceful evening at home to the bright lights of a bustling club. But tonight was different. After a long, tiring week at work, his friends had made it clear that they weren't going to let him stay home by himself. They insisted that he come with them to the hottest new nightclub in town, a place full of energy and life. John had tried to refuse, explaining that he wasn't in the mood for a night of partying. But, as usual, his friends wouldn't take no for an answer. They told him it would be a quick trip, just a couple of drinks, and they'd head home. They promised not to push him to do anything he didn't want to do. It didn't take much for them to convince him, and reluctantly, he agreed. The thought of spending another lonely evening in front of the TV didn't appeal to him. Maybe, just maybe, a night out might be a good change of pace. The drive to the club was filled with excitement. His friends were animated, talking about who they might run into at the club, what songs the DJ would be playing, and all the fun they would have. John, on the other hand, sat quietly in the back seat, feeling out of place. He wasn't sure why he had agreed to come. It wasn't like him to spend a night at a loud, crowded club, but here he was, in the back seat, heading straight into the heart of a nightlife scene that was completely foreign to him. When they arrived at the club, the sheer size of the place overwhelmed him. The exterior of the building was modern, with large glass windows, neon lights flashing in all directions. The music was already thumping from inside, and the line of people outside stretched for what seemed like miles. John could see groups of people laughing and chatting, all dressed in trendy outfits. They were waiting to get inside, each one looking like they belonged in this world of flashing lights and pulsing beats. John felt out of place just standing there, his casual clothes feeling much more out of sync with the glamorous crowd. His friends led the way to the entrance, and as they stepped inside, the noise hit him like a wall. The air was thick with music, the bass pounding in his chest. Strobes and neon lights flashed in every direction, creating a chaotic atmosphere. The club was packed, people moving in all directions, some dancing, others laughing, chatting, or simply standing around with drinks in hand. John felt like a stranger in a foreign land, surrounded by people who seemed to know exactly what they were doing and where they belonged. His friends, eager to enjoy the night, dove right into the crowd, making their way toward the dance floor without hesitation. John, on the other hand, hesitated. This wasn't his scene. He wasn't the type to jump into the middle of a crowd and start dancing. He wasn't sure what to do with himself. His friends had already lost themselves in the music, and John was left standing on the edge of it all, trying to adjust to the overwhelming noise and lights. For a moment, he thought about leaving, but that would have been awkward. Instead, he decided to find a quiet corner, hoping to escape the chaos for just a little while. With a sigh, John made his way toward the bar. As he walked through the crowd, he couldn't help but notice how everyone around him seemed so alive, so in their element. It was as though they were all connected by the music, the rhythm, the energy that filled the room. John felt like an outsider, disconnected from the excitement that everyone else seemed to be riding. At the bar, he ordered a whiskey, hoping it would help calm his nerves. The bartender was quick, handing him the drink, and John took a moment to survey the scene. The bar itself was sleek and modern, with shelves lined with bottles of various liquors. A couple of people sat on bar stools, talking to each other, while others waited for drinks. John's fingers tightened around his glass as he took a slow sip. The warmth of the whiskey settled in his chest, and for the first time that evening he started to relax a little. John found a spot at the edge of the bar, trying to stay out of the way of the other customers. As the drink began to take effect, the noise didn't seem as jarring, and the flashing lights felt a little less blinding. He realized he wasn't here for the crowd or the music. He wasn't here for the wild energy of the night. He was simply here for a drink, a moment of solitude in a place that felt anything but peaceful. He leaned against the bar, the quiet hum of the room buzzing around him. He didn't need to be part of the madness. For now, he was content to sit back, enjoy his drink, and let the world move on without him. He knew he didn't belong in this world of flashing lights and loud music, but for a few moments he didn't mind. It felt good to be alone, even if he was surrounded by hundreds of people. John's thoughts were interrupted when something caught his eye. As he took another sip of his whiskey, a figure moved through the crowd, and for a moment it felt like time slowed down. a woman walking with a kind of grace that made her stand out in the noisy, chaotic room. She wasn't the loudest or most extravagant person in the club, but there was something about her that drew his attention immediately. She was dressed in a sleek, black dress that clung to her curves, the kind of dress that seemed to shimmer under the club's flashing lights. Her hair was dark, styled in loose waves that framed her face perfectly. Her features were delicate yet striking, a sharp jawline, full lips, and eyes that were dark and mysterious. John couldn't help but notice the way she moved, effortlessly, with confidence and a calm that contrasted sharply with the frenetic energy around her. She seemed completely at ease, as if the loud music and flashing lights didn't bother her at all. In fact, she seemed to glide through the room, her eyes scanning the crowd like she was searching for something or someone. John was taken aback, unable to look away. She wasn't like the other women in the club who were caught up in the madness of the night. She had an air of mystery about her, something that made him curious, even captivated. He quickly glanced around to see if anyone else had noticed her, but most people were lost in their own worlds, dancing or chatting. It was as if she existed in her own bubble, apart from the rest of the crowd. As he watched, their eyes met across the room. For a brief moment, everything seemed to stop. The music, the chatter, the lights, all faded into the background as John's gaze locked with hers. His heart skipped a beat, and he suddenly felt self-conscious, like he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't have. He quickly turned his head, pretending to look at his drink, but it was too late. The connection had already been made. He didn't know why he felt this way, but something about her drew him in, as if she was pulling him toward her without saying a word. He'd never been one to feel drawn to strangers, especially in a place like this, but there was something magnetic about her. John found himself scanning the room again, and this time she was walking toward him. She stopped right in front of him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, her voice soft and inviting. The words were simple, yet they held an unspoken promise that sent a shiver down his spine. John couldn't speak at first. His mouth had gone dry, and his mind was racing. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was supposed to be having a quiet night, a drink by himself. But this woman, this stranger, had somehow appeared, and now she was standing right in front of him, asking to join him. John's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, especially from someone like her. He had no idea what to say. Was he supposed to be cool and collected? Or was he supposed to show interest? His brain felt like it was short-circuiting, unable to make a decision. He cleared his throat, trying to appear casual, though his nerves were betraying him. "Ah, sure," he finally managed to say, gesturing to the empty space next to him. She smiled again, a knowing, almost playful smile, and slid into the seat next to him. The scent of her perfume, a mix of jasmine and something else he couldn't quite place, drifted toward him. It was intoxicating, and John felt himself leaning in just slightly, drawn to her presence. Her closeness made him feel both anxious and intrigued. "So," she said, her eyes scanning the bar as if taking in the scene. "What brings you here tonight?" Her voice was soft, but there was a certain depth to it, as if she was asking more than just a simple question. She wasn't asking for his life story, but something in her tone made him feel like she genuinely wanted to know. John hesitated. He had never been good at small talk, especially with strangers. He was used to being alone, used to spending his evenings in quiet places. But something about this woman made him want to engage. "Just needed a drink," he said with a small chuckle, trying to keep it light. "A bit of peace and quiet away from the noise." She raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into an amused smile. "Well, I can't promise peace and quiet in a place like this, but I think it's nice to take a break every now and then." She paused, her gaze flicking toward the crowd. "Not everyone here is looking for chaos. Some of us just want a moment to breathe." John nodded, feeling an unexpected connection. There was a certain ease to her presence, a calm that made him feel less out of place. The way she spoke, careful, thoughtful, yet confident, was disarming. It wasn't what he expected from someone in a club, where everyone was usually shouting over the music or trying to be the loudest person in the room. The conversation flowed smoothly, but in a way that made John feel strangely exposed. There was a sense of ease in her presence, yet something about it made him feel like she could see right through him. Her eyes were always fixed on him with a quiet intensity that unnerved him. It wasn't in an aggressive way, but rather in a manner that made him feel both vulnerable and curious about her. As they continued talking, the woman seemed to ask all the right questions, simple ones at first, about his work, his interests, and what brought him to the club tonight. But there was an underlying layer of something more in each question, something that made him feel like he wasn't just another stranger at the bar. It was as if she genuinely wanted to understand him. Her voice was smooth and calm, like a soft lullaby weaving through the noise of the club, pulling him in deeper with each word. John was surprised by how easily he was speaking with her. He wasn't normally this open with strangers. He was usually reserved, preferring to keep his thoughts to himself. But there was something disarming about the woman, something that made him forget his usual hesitation. He found himself telling her things he had never shared with anyone before, even small details about his life that seemed insignificant. And the way she listened, attentively, nodding along, her eyes never leaving his, made him feel important, like he mattered in that moment. "You know," she said, leaning in closer as though sharing a secret, "I think most people come to places like this because they're running away from something. They want to forget their problems for a while. Let the music drown out the things they're avoiding." John paused, the statement catching him off guard. "I'm not sure if I'm running away," he replied, unsure how to respond to such a deep observation. "I just wanted a drink, a little quiet." He chuckled, though it didn't feel like a real laugh. There was a part of him that understood exactly what she meant, but he wasn't ready to admit it. She tilted her head, studying him with a curious expression. "Everyone's running from something, whether they realize it or not," she said softly. "It's what makes us human, I think. We all need something to distract ourselves from the weight of life." John shifted uncomfortably. There it was again, the way she seemed to get under his skin, unraveling him slowly with her words. He was starting to feel like he was under a magnifying glass, and it made him uneasy. Why did she seem to know so much about people, about him? Why did she have this uncanny ability to read him so well, despite knowing nothing about him? He took a long sip of his drink, trying to hide the fact that he was growing more self-conscious by the second. The music still pounded around them, but it felt distant, like it wasn't a part of their world anymore. It was just him and her in this small bubble of conversation. She had pulled him in completely, and now he was stuck, unsure of what to do with this strange, powerful connection between them. "What do you think it is that people are running from, though?" he asked, trying to keep the conversation going, but also trying to regain some control. He wanted to know more about her, to understand why she seemed so detached from the chaos of the club, yet so connected to him. Her lips curled into a small smile, as though she had been expecting the question. "I think people are afraid of themselves," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "They're afraid of facing the truth, of looking inside and seeing things they don't want to see. So they come here, they dance, they drink, they lose themselves, but they never really escape." John was silent for a moment, considering her words. She had a way of speaking that made everything seem deeper, more meaningful. But at the same time, it made him feel uncomfortable, like he was being drawn into something he wasn't ready for. He wasn't sure if he wanted to face the things she was suggesting. After all, he had always been someone who preferred to keep things simple, to avoid confronting anything that might disrupt the peace he'd built around himself. He looked at her, trying to read her expression. She seemed so calm, so composed, as though she had everything figured out. But something about the way she spoke made him wonder if she was hiding something too. Maybe she was running from something herself. After all, wasn't that the point of coming to a place like this? Before he could say anything else, she stood up abruptly. The sudden movement caught him off guard, and for a moment he thought she was leaving. A strange feeling of disappointment washed over him, though he wasn't sure why. "I'll be back in a minute," she said with a wink, and just as quickly as she had appeared, she disappeared into the crowd. John sat alone at the bar, his mind racing. The conversation with the woman had felt like a whirlwind, a conversation that had stirred something inside him that he wasn't ready to confront. He was left with an odd mix of emotions, curiosity, confusion, and a strange sense of anticipation. Where had she gone? Why had she left so suddenly? These questions swirled in his mind as the seconds ticked by. His whiskey was now nearly gone, the glass empty in front of him. He hadn't noticed how quickly it had slipped away as he'd been lost in thoughts of her. He wasn't used to feeling this unsettled. Usually he could keep his composure, distance himself from whatever situation he found himself in, but with her it was different. She had a way of pulling him in, making him feel vulnerable yet drawn to her at the same time. His thoughts were interrupted when he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned quickly, his heart racing for reasons he couldn't quite explain. There she was again, the woman, standing right behind him, with that same enigmatic smile on her lips. Her presence felt like an electric charge that had just re-entered his world. For a moment, John's breath caught in his chest. "Did you miss me?" she asked, her voice teasing but with an undercurrent of something deeper, something more serious. John blinked, trying to collect himself. The way she stood so close, almost as if they were the only two people in the entire club, made him feel exposed again. "I didn't expect you to come back," he admitted, though his voice wasn't quite steady. He wasn't sure why he felt this way. There was something about her that made his usual sense of calm evaporate, leaving him with a sense of urgency that didn't make sense. She smiled again, a little more knowingly this time. "Why? Because I don't seem like the type to stay in one place for too long," she asked, her eyebrow arched. There was something almost playful in her tone, but John wasn't sure if it was just her natural demeanor or if she was playing with him. She had this ability to turn even the simplest questions into a game. "I wasn't sure what to expect," John said, trying to regain control of the conversation. He took a slow, deliberate sip from his glass, hoping the action would ground him. "You kind of disappeared without a word." "I was just getting some air," she explained casually, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm not one to linger in the noise for too long. Sometimes, I need to breathe without being suffocated by the chaos." She paused as if weighing something. "But I also don't like to leave a conversation unfinished. You seemed interesting, so here I am." Her words sent a small thrill down his spine. Interesting. John wasn't sure how to respond to that. He didn't feel particularly interesting. In fact, he had spent most of his life trying to stay under the radar, to avoid standing out. But something about the way she spoke made him feel as if he were the center of her attention in a way that no one had ever made him feel before. "I didn't think you'd be interested in me," John said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. He wasn't sure where the comment came from, but there it was. He felt exposed again, vulnerable in a way that made him uneasy. The fact that she was so direct with him, so open and unafraid to engage in deeper conversations, made him feel like he was being scrutinized, and strangely he didn't mind. Her gaze softened, her smile shifting into something warmer. "Why wouldn't I be interested?" she asked, her voice no longer playful but serious, almost probing. "You're here, aren't you? You're having a drink, and I'm having one with you. That's more than most people get." She leaned a little closer, her tone lowering. "What's the real reason you're here, John?" John froze. She knew his name. He hadn't told her. How did she know? Was she just playing along, guessing, or was there something more? His heart began to race again, this time with a little more intensity. "I never said my name," he said, his voice coming out hoarse. She chuckled softly, the sound light and melodic. "I'm not some random person off the street, John," she said. "I know exactly who you are." The words hit him like a shockwave. How did she know? He had no idea, and it made him feel exposed, like a character in a story that wasn't his own. His mind scrambled for an explanation, but the only thing he could think about was the odd feeling that had settled in his chest. He tried to push it away, to focus on the present moment, but the unease remained. "Who are you, really?" John asked, his voice softer now, more cautious. He wasn't sure where this conversation was headed, but something told him that he wasn't going to like the answer. John sat back in his seat, trying to steady his breathing. His mind was racing. What had just happened? The mysterious woman who had come and gone so quickly, leaving behind a trail of unease and confusion, was not like anyone he had met before. Her presence had thrown him off balance, making him feel exposed in ways he wasn't used to. And now, he found himself unable to shake the feeling that this night was spiraling into something unpredictable. His heart was still pounding in his chest. The way she had leaned in close to him, whispered those cryptic words in his ear, something about him looking for something, something more than just a drink, it unsettled him. How had she known? Was she toying with him? Or was there a deeper meaning to her words? John tried to shake it off, but it was no use. He couldn't deny that there was something about her, something that both intrigued and unnerved him. He reached for his glass, but it was empty. Sighing, he signaled the bartender for another drink, hoping that the alcohol would help numb the confusion swirling in his mind. As he waited for his whiskey, he tried to calm himself, but the lingering question about the woman was like a constant hum in his head. Who was she? What was she after? Why had she targeted him? The bartender returned with a fresh glass, and John took a long, slow sip. He needed to stop overthinking everything. Maybe it was just one of those weird, random encounters that people sometimes had. Maybe she wasn't trying to get into his head. Maybe it was all just a game, an innocent interaction. He could forget about it, enjoy the rest of his night, and move on. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. He turned his attention back to the crowd, trying to lose himself in the noise, the flashing lights, and the steady pulse of the music. But his eyes kept scanning the room, searching for her, hoping for a glimpse. It was ridiculous, really. He didn't even know her name, and yet he couldn't get her out of his mind. The way she spoke, the way she had looked at him, the way she seemed to see right through him. It all felt too intense, too personal for something that was supposed to be just a random encounter. As he sat there, lost in his thoughts, a sudden movement caught his eye. There she was again, standing by the edge of the dance floor, looking directly at him. Their eyes met for a moment, and in that brief second, John felt a jolt of electricity run through him. His pulse quickened, and his breath caught in his throat. She didn't look away. Instead, she held his gaze, her eyes dark and knowing, like she was daring him to make the next move. Without thinking, John found himself standing, walking toward her. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the pull of her gaze, or maybe it was the strange feeling that had settled in his chest ever since she'd first spoken to him. Whatever it was stronger than his hesitation, stronger than his usual sense of caution. As he approached her, she didn't smile this time. There was no playful grin or teasing look. Instead, she seemed calm, almost serene, as though she had been waiting for him to come to her. She didn't speak, but the energy between them was palpable. The air around them felt charged, thick with anticipation, and John could barely hear the music over the pounding of his own heart. "Why do you keep doing this?" John asked, his voice low, almost to himself. He wasn't sure what he meant, but the words had come out before he could stop them. Why was she messing with his head? Why was she making him feel this way? She tilted her head slightly, her eyes never leaving his. "Doing what?" she asked softly, her voice as calm as ever. "I'm just here." But that was the problem. She wasn't just here. Every word she said, every look she gave, made him feel like she was more than just someone sitting at a bar. She made him feel like the only thing that mattered in the entire room was their connection, whether it was real or just an illusion. She was drawing him in without saying much, leaving him unsure of what was happening, but completely caught up in the whirlwind of it. "Why me?" John asked, his voice barely above a whisper now. He couldn't keep the question inside any longer. It had been nagging at him since the moment she'd first walked up to him at the bar. Why had she chosen him? Out of everyone in the club, why him? Her lips curled into a small, knowing smile, and for the first time, John saw something that wasn't just an enigma. There was a flicker of something deeper in her eyes, something that almost felt like sympathy, but it was fleeting. "Why not you?" she replied simply. The answer was so vague, so cryptic, that John felt even more lost than before. He was used to straightforwardness, to things being clear, but with her, nothing was clear. Every answer seemed to raise more questions, and the more he tried to understand, the more he felt like he was falling into a trap of his own making. John's heart hammered in his chest as he stood there, facing the woman whose presence had completely unsettled him. Every word she spoke, every look she gave, seemed to pull him in deeper, yet he couldn't figure out exactly why. The night had taken a sharp turn into territory he wasn't prepared to navigate. The confusion, the intensity, the inexplicable pull between them. It was like a magnet drawing him towards something he wasn't sure he wanted. She stood close to him now, too close. He could feel the heat radiating off her body, her breath just a whisper away from his ear. His pulse raced, and his mind was a blur of thoughts and questions. Was she playing a game with him? Was this some kind of test? Or was there something real in this strange connection they shared? "You've been looking for something all night, haven't you?" she asked softly, her words floating in the air between them. Her voice was calm, steady, but there was an edge to it now, a sense of certainty that made John feel even more vulnerable than before. "I don't know what I'm looking for," he admitted, his voice low, almost as if confessing a secret. He wasn't sure why he was being so honest with her, but something about her made him drop his guard, made him feel like he could speak truths he hadn't dared to voice before. "I came here just to have a drink. I didn't expect any of this." Her eyes softened, though there was still that knowing look in them, like she had seen something in him that he hadn't yet recognized. "No one ever really knows what they're looking for," she replied, her lips curling into a small, almost sad smile. "But sometimes the thing you need most is the one thing you're too afraid to face." The words struck a chord in John's chest. He felt his stomach tighten, as though the weight of the moment had finally settled into his bones. What was she saying? What was she trying to tell him? He wasn't sure if he was ready to face whatever it was, but he knew one thing: he couldn't walk away from this. Not now. Not after everything that had already happened between them. "I don't know what you want from me," John said, his voice thick with a mix of frustration and confusion. He took a step back, trying to regain some semblance of control, but it was futile. The magnetic pull between them was too strong. "You keep saying things that don't make sense. What do you want me to do? What do you want from me?" For the first time, the woman seemed to hesitate. She didn't immediately respond, and John could see a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. It was subtle, but it was there. It made him wonder if she, too, was grappling with something deeper, something she hadn't yet figured out. She took a slow breath, as if weighing her next words carefully. "I'm not here to ask anything of you, John," she said, her voice quieter now, almost like a confession. "I'm here to show you something. To make you see something about yourself that you've been running from." She reached out slowly, her fingers brushing his arm lightly, sending a shiver through him. "But it's up to you whether you want to see it or not." Her touch was electrifying, and for a moment, John couldn't move. He couldn't think. Everything inside him was screaming to step away, to pull back from whatever this was, but something held him there. Something in her words, in the way she looked at him, made him feel like this moment was inevitable, like it was always meant to happen. "Why me?" he asked again, the question burning on his lips. "What makes me so special? Why are you choosing me?" She smiled again, but this time it was different. It wasn't playful or teasing, it wasn't distant or mysterious. It was a sad smile, full of understanding. "I'm not choosing you, John. I'm not special, and neither are you. But you're here, and you're open, even if you don't know it yet. You're more ready than you think. The question is, are you ready to face what you're looking for?" Her words left him in a daze. What did she mean by that? Was this some sort of mind game? Was she trying to manipulate him? Or was there something more to it? He didn't know. But the way she spoke, with such certainty and calmness, made him feel like he was teetering on the edge of something big. Something that could change everything. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The club's music played on in the background, the beat of the bass reverberating in the floor, but it felt distant now, as if they were in their own world, suspended in time. John's heart raced as the seconds passed. He felt a mix of fear and excitement, like he was standing on the precipice of something he couldn't back away from. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I don't want to face it? What if I'm not ready?" The tension in the air between John and the mysterious woman had grown unbearable. Every word she spoke seemed to press against him, unraveling the carefully built walls he had spent years constructing around his emotions. The music in the club now felt distant, as though it was happening in another world. All that mattered in that moment was the woman standing before him, her presence wrapping around him like a storm he couldn't escape. He didn't know what she had done to him, but he couldn't ignore it any longer. The feelings inside him had shifted from confusion and fear to something else, something deeper, more primal. He didn't understand it, but he couldn't deny it. He had spent so long in control of his own emotions, so detached from anything that might make him vulnerable, and now here she was, throwing all of that into chaos. "Are you ready to face it, John?" she asked again, her voice low and almost hypnotic. Her words had become a constant refrain, a question he couldn't shake. "Are you ready to see what you've been running from?" John wanted to say no. He wanted to pull back, to retreat from whatever this was, but something inside him stopped him. There was a pull, a force stronger than his fear, urging him to move forward, to embrace whatever this connection between them was. It was terrifying, yes, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't sure what was going to happen next, and that thought both thrilled and terrified him. "I don't know what I'm supposed to be looking for," John confessed, his voice strained. "I don't even know what you want from me." She didn't respond immediately, instead simply watching him, her gaze steady and intense. Her silence was almost as overwhelming as her words had been. It was like she was waiting for him to come to an understanding, for him to figure it out on his own. And then, finally, she spoke. "You've spent your life pretending, John," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "Pretending that everything is fine, that you don't want anything more, that you're not yearning for something you can't quite name." She stepped closer to him, her presence almost suffocating now. "But I can see it in you. I can see the fear, the longing. You've been running from it, from yourself." John's breath caught in his throat. She was right. He had spent so much of his life hiding from his own desires, from his own emotions. The walls he had built were a defense mechanism, a way to keep himself safe from the world and the messiness of human connection. But now, standing here with her, those walls were beginning to crumble. "I don't know how to stop running," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The admission felt like a release, like something inside him had been holding its breath for too long and was finally letting go. The woman's expression softened, her eyes full of understanding. "You don't need to stop running, John," she said. "You just need to stop hiding." She reached out slowly, her fingers brushing the back of his hand, and John felt a jolt of electricity run through him. "You don't need to be afraid of what you want." He closed his eyes for a moment, letting her words sink in. He had spent so much of his life suppressing his feelings, hiding his desires, afraid of what they might reveal about him. But now, with her standing in front of him, he realized that maybe, just maybe, he didn't need to hide anymore. Maybe it was time to let go of the fear that had controlled him for so long. He opened his eyes to find her looking at him, her gaze soft but unwavering. She wasn't trying to manipulate him, she wasn't playing games. She was simply showing him something he hadn't allowed himself to see, something he had buried deep within himself. "I've never let anyone see this side of me," John whispered, his voice rough. "I don't know if I can." The woman smiled gently, her eyes filled with empathy. "You don't need to be perfect, John. You just need to be honest. With me, with yourself." Her words hit him like a tidal wave. Honesty. He hadn't allowed himself to be truly honest with anyone in a long time, especially not with himself. But as she stood before him, as her fingers lightly traced the edge of his palm, he realized something. The truth had always been there, buried beneath the surface, waiting to be acknowledged. The fear, the longing, the desire, it was all a part of who he was. And maybe it was time to stop running from it. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as it met hers. The moment their skin touched, something shifted between them, something powerful, something undeniable. He felt the weight of his own vulnerability, and for the first time, he didn't want to run from it.